50 years ago, we went to the moon. We called it Apollo.
What many people don't know is that Apollo had a twin.
She was a woman named Artemis,
goddess of the moon.
We are returning to the moon
as a new generation of explorers.
This time to stay.
And to prepare to achieve humanity's next giant leap of sending the first human missions to Mars.
We believe our course will redefine what is possible.
That we would discover life-saving,
earth-changing science.
And that the challenges ahead will inspire generations.
This is our manifest.
For all who wondered if we could return.
For all who dreamed of pressing beyond.
This is your calling.
We go for all of America.
We go. We go as the Artemis Generation.
We go.
Hello and welcome to the official kickoff event for NASA's App Development Challenge. We appreciate you joining us today as we launch the latest version of the ADC specifically designed for middle and high school students and educators. My name is Jamie Semple. I'm a NASA Education Specialist with Paragon Tech. And I work at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. I'll be providing details on this year's challenge, and we'll also be joined today by NASA subject matter experts to talk to you a little bit about NASA's Artemis program and also share with you some essential information to be successful in this year's challenge. So what exactly is the App Development Challenge? The ADC is a coding challenge where NASA presents technical problems to students seeking their contribution for future exploration missions. By participating in the App Development Challenge, you directly take part in the Artemis Generation's efforts to land American astronauts, including the first woman and the next man on the moon by the end of 2024. This year's App Development Challenge was created in collaboration with NASA's Space Communications and Navigation Team, also known as NASA SCAN. The SCAN team needs an app that visualizes the moon's South Pole region. Based on that need, we are asking students to form teams to create a visualization that will display essential information of the moon's South Pole region. Student teams will have up to 7 weeks to create an app solution and post a video of that solution online for NASA to review and potentially use in the future. We'll talk a little bit more about the ADC in just a few moments. I'd like to give you an idea of our agenda today. In just a moment, we'll have some opening remarks, and then we'll have 3 presentations. The first presentation will be about NASA's Artemis program, the second presentation about the App Development Challenge, and the third presentation presented by our ADC technical advisor, who's going to talk a little bit more about the app that you're going to create and how to be successful in this endeavor. If you have any questions throughout the course of the presentations today, we encourage you to go ahead and post a question in the chat. We'll try to answer those after each presentation, or most likely at the end of all the presentations today. But now it's time to officially launch this year's App Development Challenge. I'd like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Danae Fullwood, NASA's Next Gen STEM Moon to Mars lead, to provide some opening remarks. Hey, Danae, thank you for being here today.
Hi, Jamie. Thank you for having me. I just want to say to everyone who is tuning in, thank you. Thank you for your interest in this opportunity, and thank you for your interest in NASA. Thank you for being a part of the Artemis Generation. We are looking to you to help us stay inspired and stay on track when it comes to landing the first woman on the moon and putting the next man on the moon. We do believe that your creative ideas and your input is something to be valued, something to be treasured, something to be incorporated. This is something I would love to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to hear about. So please make sure that you share this with other middle school and high school students. Do not keep this opportunity to yourself. Be collaborative, be creative, and be certain to participate in those things that we offer. If you don't have the background of knowing what NASA has, there is an opportunity for you to stay abreast to what we have coming down the pike. That is, you can join our NASA Express email list. Be certain to go to nasa.gov and sign up for the NASA Express email list. This will give you the opportunity to stay abreast of all the student competitions, all of the lessons, all of the SME subject matter expert opportunities and presentations that can keep you following NASA and what we're doing. We're so happy to have you. I'm happy to invite you to participate in this activity, and thank you.
Great, thank you, Danae. We appreciate your time today. All right, students, it's time to join the Artemis Generation and take part in NASA's efforts to return to the moon. In order to do that, we need to know a little bit more about NASA's Artemis program. Our first presenter today is Patricia Moore. Patricia is a member of the Artemis communication team, and she's going to tell us all about the Artemis program. Patricia, thanks for joining us today. We're looking forward to your presentation. Go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm super excited to be with you this afternoon, and I'm incredibly excited to share with you about NASA's return to the moon with the Artemis program. So to kick things off, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I work at Johnson Space Center, which is in Houston, Texas, and I'm part of the Artemis communication team. And our job is to share NASA's story and involve the public and schools and museums and people all over the world and share what we're doing to get our first woman and the next man to the moon in 2024. So let me show you a few pictures of my past and tell you a little bit about my story to NASA. So I started off really falling in love with space when I was in college. I wanted to be a teacher when I was in college, and so I thought, hey, it's a great idea to get some experience working with students. So I worked at Space Center Houston, which is our official visitor center for Johnson Space Center, and I worked there for 10 years. So I finished college, got my education degree, I met my husband, and that's a picture of he and I like in 2002, I think. And then after working at Space Center Houston, I had the opportunity to come and work at NASA. So my first job at Johnson Space Center was working in the Digital Learning Network, where I taught science lessons and shared NASA stories with students and teachers. And not only did I work in a studio, but in the next slide, you can see that I got the opportunity to work with astronauts and got to go on location during analog missions, which are practice missions for future missions to the moon and Mars. So that was super exciting. And so from there, I now work specifically with the Artemis communication team and get the chance to share NASA's story with people like you and mostly with museums and science centers. That's kind of my area of expertise. All right, so let's talk about Artemis. So like I mentioned earlier, Artemis is the new lunar exploration program for humans. And our goal and our charter is to get the first woman and the next man to the surface of the moon by the end of 2024. And Artemis, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, is the twin sister of Apollo. So it really is the perfect name for this program, which will include sending female astronauts to the moon as well. So we're super excited to do this, and we need lots of new capabilities and lots of new equipment to get us there. So let's take a look at what we need to get us to the moon. All right, so in order to get to the moon, we have a lot of people at NASA that are working together. We have people working on hardware like rockets and spacecrafts, but we also have people who are scientists that are helping us choose the best location to land on the surface of the moon and to help us figure out what kinds of science that we can do on the surface. So some of the benefits of returning to the moon is being able to explore the solar system in a new way, being able to learn about the water cycle on the moon and look for water, figuring out what can we do on the surface, what resources are available to us to make living off the moon easier. And all of these different science and technology demonstrations that we do will all help us for future Mars missions. So going to Mars is the end goal. That's where we want to go, right? And in order to do that, we want to practice closer to home. And the moon is the great place to do that. Next slide. So when we go to the moon, NASA's focusing on the South Pole, and the Shackleton crater is one of several craters that NASA's interested in. We have not chosen a landing site yet, but Shackleton is pretty exciting. It's one of those really interesting craters in the South Pole region that has permanently shadowed areas. And in this picture, you can get an idea of how big Shackleton is. We have a map of Washington, D.C. laid right on top of that crater, and you can see it's very large. And if we queue up the next video, you can get an idea of, and I'll explain why the South Pole is of interest. If you watch this video, you'll be able to see the sunlight and see how things change. So around the rim of these craters in the South Pole, there is a lot of light. And in the South Pole area, we are almost in constant sunlight most of the time. And then there's a few months out of the year where it's dark, but we get a lot of sunlight at night and all throughout the year. And that's really important, So we have light for our astronauts so they can move around. We can use solar power to power all of our equipment. And so that's one reason the South Pole is great. And then you have those dark craters that you saw earlier. And those dark areas have permanently shadowed regions that have never touched or been touched by the sunlight. And that's where our water ice is. So traveling to the South Pole gives us access to water, which can be used for drinking water, for turned into oxygen, even rocket fuel. It's a great place to look maybe to see if there's any evidence of life on the moon. So it's a great place to do science. And then it also gives us the sunlight that we need. Now, this chart is one of my favorites because it really shows you how difficult traveling into space gets the farther away you get from Earth. So going to the space station takes a few hours. You have to have a heat shield to come home because you experience 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit in return entry. But as you notice, when we go to the moon, it gets more difficult. And then look at Mars. It becomes incredibly difficult. We go from taking a matter of hours to get to space and come home to 9 months to get to Mars and back. And so, like I mentioned earlier, that moon is in that perfect place where we're a few days away to give us an experience to be independent and to learn to live without the constant support of the ground and knowing that you can get home very quickly. And so that will be ready for our Mars missions in the future. Next slide. So to get to Mars, we're going to need a rocket. And the Space Launch System is the rocket that NASA's building right now to get us to the moon. And we'll be able to use this same system to get to Mars. So the Space Launch System is different from all of the other rockets that are in existence that are built right now. And it has a greater payload capability, which means we can carry more stuff. And when we go to the moon and when we go to Mars, we're going to need to take a lot of stuff to keep our astronauts safe. We have to take our supplies and our food and our rovers and our experiments and all of our tech and all of our equipment. And the Space Launch System gives us that capability to be able to take a large amount of payload away from Earth orbit to the moon. And in this next picture, you can get an idea of how the Space Launch System compares to other rockets that we've used in the past. So there we go. That next slide, you can take a look at the space shuttle. You see how much smaller it is. The space shuttle didn't have a large amount of payload capability, which means you can take stuff, right? The Space Launch System, that first version, we can take about 12 elephants worth of payload. The second version you see there, we can take up to 22 elephants worth of stuff. And it will end up being taller and more powerful than our moon rocket, the Saturn V. So we're super excited about the Space Launch System because it's almost finished. And in this next picture, you can see the actual hardware, the actual rocket sitting on a test stand at Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. And in just a few weeks, probably the beginning of November, end of October to beginning of November, we're going to do the final large test for the Space Launch System and fire all 4 of the engines on the core stage. And we're going to strap it to a test stand and we're going to test all 4 engines at the same time. So be on the lookout for that test. It'll be all over NASA TV and all over the internet. So the core stage is almost finished. That's really our last piece. And but there's more to the rocket than just the rocket, right? You have to have a place for the people. And the Orion spacecraft is this next picture, and this is where the crew ride. It is placed on top of the rocket, and the Orion spacecraft can carry 4 astronauts, and it's kind of what we call like a taxi. So the Space Launch System carries Orion to Earth orbit. The Orion goes from Earth orbit to the moon, and then it brings the astronauts back home. And so it's our vehicle that gets the astronauts to and from the lunar orbit. Now, the Orion doesn't land on the surface of the moon. We have to have an entirely new vehicle for that. And so in this next picture, we'll talk a little bit about the human, it's not the human landing systems. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. So the Artemis programs have several different missions. The Artemis 1 is our first mission that takes place at the middle to end of 2021, so about a year from now. And that will be a test mission of our vehicle and of our rocket and our spacecraft. And in this next picture, we focus on Artemis 2, I think that's next. And Artemis 2 will be the mission that we carry crew for the first time. And that will take place in 2023, about 2 years from Artemis 1. And we'll take astronauts to orbit the moon, and then we'll bring them home. We're not landing on the moon in 2023. We're going to save that for our Artemis 3 mission. And in this next picture, you can see Artemis 3. Artemis 3, which will be our astronauts crew as they fly onto the moon. And then in this final picture, you'll see our lander on the surface of the moon and our astronauts traveling to the surface with the first woman and the next man. So it's super exciting. Now, I jumped the gun earlier. I mentioned human landing systems, and I think that's what's up next. So let's look. Yeah, here we go. All right. So in order to get to the surface of the moon, we have to have a vehicle just like we did in the Apollo. We had the lunar lander, or the LEM, to land astronauts to the moon, and NASA's developing a lander now. But we're doing it a little bit different. So in this next picture, you'll see that we have 3 different ideas, and these 3 different ideas came from companies. We have ideas from Dynetics, from SpaceX, which is in the middle, and then with Blue Origin at the end. And these 3 companies all proposed ideas to NASA, and they were the 3 that were selected to come up with a landing system. And NASA will choose one of these 3 companies to develop the human landing system that we'll use in 2024, and we'll potentially use the other landing systems for future missions. So NASA's working really closely with industry, so companies, to make our Artemis missions possible. Now, in order to stay in the moon, in the area around the moon for a long period of time, we need something else. And that something else is called the Gateway. And the Gateway in this next picture is like an orbiting platform, an orbiting spacecraft that stays in orbit around the moon. And this is where the Orion spacecraft and the astronauts come, and they attach to the Gateway. The astronauts can get out, stay inside the Gateway for a few days or a few hours as they prepare then to get into their human landing system to go to the surface. So this is going to be like a waypoint or an outpost for us to prepare for missions to the surface of the moon. And we may also use the Gateway to help us prepare for missions onto Mars. So it's an important part of that, what we call sustainability, which gives us time to be on the moon for longer periods of time. So not just to go once or twice, but we want to go and we want to stay longer each time. In this next picture, you'll get an idea of what those future missions could look like. So when we go to the surface of the moon, we're going to need new spacesuits. We're going to need habitats. We're going to need new tools. We're going to need scientific equipment. All of these new things that we're developing we'll be able to use to make an outpost and a base on the surface of the moon and the South Pole area. So I think maybe it froze. I don't see the next one coming up. There we go. All right. So in order to make this possible, Gateway, our partners in Gateway, will be able to not just be commercial partners like SpaceX and Northrop Grumman, and we have Maxar, but now we're going to involve our international partners like the Canadian Space Agency and JAXA, which is Japan, and Russia, and ESA, our European partners, to make getting to the moon stronger, a more collaborative endeavor. And in this next picture, you'll see all of our efforts working out great on the surface of the moon, testing out our suits, and really looking forward to how Artemis program can help us prepare for missions to Mars. Remember, Mars is our goal, right? So let's go to the next picture and let's go to Mars. So Mars missions are way into the future. NASA's goal is to have our first mission in 2020 by the end of the 2030s, which is not that far away when you think about it, but we're not quite ready to do that yet. And in this next picture, you'll see that NASA's been going to Mars for quite a while now. We've got rovers that we've been sending for years, and we just launched the 2020 rover, or the Perseverance rover, like a couple of months ago. And so we know a lot. And each of these missions teaches us more. So in this next slide, you'll be able to imagine what it would be like for astronauts on the surface of Mars. And all of these things that we're practicing with Artemis will get us prepared and ready. And I hope that maybe one of you will get to see this image in our next slide. So if you go to the surface of the moon, if you go to the surface of Mars, you could look up in the night sky and see this. And if you look up in this next picture, you'll be able to see Earth as a tiny speck in the sky. And that's what Earth would look like if you were on Mars. So it's very, very far away, right? Millions of miles away. But we want to do it, and we need you to help us get there. So in this final picture, in this final slide, we're going to say, let's go, right? It's time is now, let's go. And being a part of this app development challenge, you will help us make Artemis missions possible. You will help our scientists and engineers gather data that we need to make these missions successful. So with that, I appreciate your time. And if you have any questions about NASA's Artemis program, I'll be around to answer those either now or at the end.
All right, thanks, Patricia. We do have a few questions. So let's go ahead and answer those. First question is, how long does it take to get to the moon?
Great question. So to get to the moon is in between 3 to 4 days. So it takes a little while, but that's not so bad when you think about going to Mars would take about 9 months, right?
All right. Is Artemis 3 still planned to land at Shackleton, or is it shifting towards an old Apollo site?
So we are planning to land somewhere in the South Pole region, maybe by Shackleton, maybe not. That has yet to be determined. I know there's still conversations happening within NASA to determine the safest landing spot for this first mission in 2024. But we really plan to land in the South Pole. That's where we want to do our science. That's where we want to do our exploration because we've never been there before. But maybe one day later on, we may return to some of the old Apollo sites. But as of right now, NASA does not have that in its charter. It's not part of the plan.
All right. Next question is, are we looking to make temporary or permanent lodgings on the moon?
Great question. So those first few missions will be temporary lodging situations, right? We want to get there. We want to know we can do it safely. We want to test out all of our systems and our equipment first. And then once we get into a groove where we feel comfortable and we're ready, then we'll start building permanent structures. So a base that we can return to and eventually grow and expand upon. Great question.
Great. 2 more questions. How are we going to get oxygen to the gateway?
Ooh, so all of our equipment and supplies that includes oxygen are taken on supply ships. So it could be taken with us on an SLS mission, and then the Orion would then take it to the orbit and take it to Gateway. Or NASA is also considering, other ways of getting supplies to Gateway. It could be a commercial partner, a company that provides a service to NASA to take supplies. And so all of that is being worked out right now. Right now, we know that those first missions will be focused on the Space Launch System and Orion, getting us what we need, but NASA's open to other possibilities. So if other companies have the capability of getting rockets and cargo safely to the moon, just like we have companies that can supply the space station, NASA is open to buying services from those companies in the future.
All right, we'll take one more question and we'll try to answer the rest at the end of the presentation today.
Sure.
Based on which criteria will NASA choose one of the human landing systems, SpaceX, Dynetics, etc., for the Artemis missions?
So I don't get to be in the room when they talk about what exactly they're looking for. So I don't know. I can't answer that one very well. But I can tell you that we want to do it in the timeline, being able to make it happen in 2024, and we want it to be safe and reliable. So safety is always first, even before speed and staying on schedule, safety is always first. So they will choose the company that they believe can get it done and can get it done safely by 2024. But that doesn't kick out the other companies out of the running for future missions. But there can only be one for that 2024 mission. And you'll hear probably within the next 6 months, a year, I don't really know the exact timeline, which company that will be, because we need to give them enough time to build it, right, and test it. So we should hear something, I would imagine, fairly soon, which company gets that award for the 2024 mission.
All right, great. So students, if you have any more questions for Patricia about the Artemis program, you can go ahead and post those, and we'll try to get those answered at the end of the presentations before we wrap up today. At this point in time, we're going to go ahead and talk about the App Development Challenge, and I'm going to provide some details for all of you that are interested in registering a team, or if you've already registered, what exactly is available now as we start the challenge today. So as I mentioned earlier, you're going to create a visualization of the moon's South Pole region for SCAN to actually use in future mission planning activities. There is a wide range of contributions that your app can actually be utilized for by SCAN. You see some of those there, but effectively the visualizations that you create will allow them to identify possible exploration routes and optimize communication. When our astronauts land on the South Pole of the moon, they're not necessarily going to land in the place that they're going to explore. And that's one of the foundations for our challenge. So we want to be able to plot a path to that site for exploration and also maintain communication. So let's take a look at the challenge overview and get some more information on what's going to happen in the next few weeks. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to go to our website. You can see the link there, and it's probably posted in the chat. But go ahead and if you have an opportunity, go to our website, because we're going to talk a lot about what just became available today by way of the website, specifically the ADC guide and the coding components. But as far as the challenge itself, as I mentioned, you get 7 weeks to create an app. And once you're done with creating your app, you're actually not going to submit that to us. You're actually going to go ahead and produce a video and submit that online and talking all about the app that you have created. That's all based off of scoring rubrics, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But based on that video, we will go ahead and down select teams to interviews. So at that point in time, you'll have the opportunity to interview with the ADC and scan teams, and we're going to find out a little bit more about the app you created, a little bit more about your team, and based off of those interviews, we'll go ahead and select a top team, or possibly 2 teams or more for a culminating event experience. Once again, that's going to be a 2 to 3 day event that's most likely will take place in February of 2021. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, especially with what's going on in the world today, as we might actually have to switch that to a virtual student symposium. But this time, let's go ahead and look at challenge eligibility. If you are on the ADC website and you click on the Get Started Here tile, you'll find all the information about this year's App Development Challenge. That is also located in the ADC guide. Here are some of the key points for being eligible to participate in the challenge. But really the full list is available on the website. So you want to make sure that you review that if you haven't registered yet and you meet all those requirements before sending in your intent to participate. But any formal or informal U.S. education organization can participate. That would be obviously schools, after-school programs are eligible, science centers, scouting groups. If you're at a school as part of a military base overseas, you can certainly participate. It just has to be a U.S. education organization. Teams may be a middle school or high school team. We have 2 categories this year. Middle school is determined to be or considered to be grades 5 through 8, and high school is grades 9 through 12. So you can participate in the 2 different levels, but you can only be on 1 team only. You must be on a team led by a certified and practicing K through 12 educator. That is our lead teacher. That's who the ADC team will communicate with. So that will be the person that registers your team. In order to register, the lead teacher must send a signed letter of support from your principal and administrator by way of email with an intent to participate in the challenge. And that's going to actually go to jsc-m2mstem@mail.nasa.gov. That will be posted here in the chat in just a moment. It'll also be available later as part of the presentation. That's how you get a hold of the ADC team for your questions and to register to participate. So now let's talk about what became available today on our website, the ADC guide and coding components, The ADC guide has all the details that you need to participate in the challenge. It is available on our website now. If you go to the main page, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner a tile that says ADC guide and coding components available now. And you'll have all the information on that next page about the guide and some additional coding components, which I'm going to talk about now. But the guide itself has all the eligibility requirements, which we've touched on briefly, and then all the app development details. So everything that you need to know about what we're expecting to see in your app is listed in the guide. That also matches with what's in the scoring rubrics. So we'll have a scoring rubric for middle school and a scoring rubric for high school. So you want to read the guide from cover to cover and make sure you understand all the information that is available to you to create your app and what we are specifically looking for as far as the visualization and additional elements. Once again, we are asking you to visualize the Moon's South Pole region. We want you to plot a path for exploration. That's actually going to go from our landing site to our exploration destination site. And then we want you to place 10 communication link checkpoints along the way. So all that detailed information on what is expected and some suggestions on best practices and resources will be located in the guide. We also have our timeline and then the scoring rubrics, which detail out the scoring rubrics actually detail out the points that you would receive based on the app elements. And if we could go back to the next slide for just a moment. I want to talk about 2 additional things. The next up is the lunar data file. So how are you creating this visualization? We're actually going to provide you a lunar data file. And our technical advisor, Dr. Brian Walsh, will talk a little bit more about that. But effectively, that is the data that we need to see displayed in your app. So it's actually from minus 90 degrees north to minus 88 degrees north at the lunar South Pole. And the data file is on the website, and it will take a little bit of time to download, but it's on the same page as the ADC guide itself. And then finally, we've provided a terrain texture. This is a PNG file. to help you start creating your app. You do not have to use that terrain texture, but we've provided it just as an example and hopefully to get you moving in the right direction as far as creating your visualization. So let's go ahead and take a look at those coding components that was just up on the screen. Our technical advisor will talk a little bit more about this, but that data file that I just mentioned will actually identify our landing site and our destination site. You can see here, this is a 2D visualization of the data that we want you to go ahead and create your app from. And it's actually color-coded based off of slope. The lunar data file provides you is going to have latitude, longitude, slope, and height. Or actually it's elevation, but we call it height because we ask high school students to actually calculate an elevation angle. So this would just be a basic example of pretty much what you're going to create. Now, it'd be great to have this in 3D, but just for our presentation today, this will give you an idea of what's going on. So blue is above 15 degrees of slope, and yellow is under 15 degrees of slope, or equal to. So you would have to plot that path for expiration and identify those communication link checkpoints. Like I said, our technical advisor will talk a little bit more about this, but I just wanted to introduce this as we're moving forward. So let's go ahead and take a look at the timeline that you have to complete development of your app. This is our first of 4 live virtual connections. And our next event will actually be on October 14th. These live virtual connections will provide you ADC updates. They'll provide you presentations from NASA subject matter experts on different parts of creating an app. So the next event on October 14th, we're actually going to talk about creating visualizations from a lunar data file. And we're going to have subject matter experts talk to you a little bit about using game engines, specifically Unity and Unreal. So it'll be a great opportunity to kind of see what their approach would be if they were creating an app. Just like you're doing, and then you also get information that you can use for creating your own visualization. And then we'll meet again on October 28th. This is our 3rd live virtual connection. We're going to talk a little bit more about developing your app, the human interface of app development, and then also we'll get an opportunity to have an employee profile and someone who's actually part of NASA tell us a little bit about their experience. That's also the last day to register for the challenge. So if you're just joining us today, it's not too late to form a team and register. You have up to 4 weeks to do that. And then after that deadline, we'll go ahead and have 1 more live virtual connection just for the registered teams. Video submissions are due on November 18th. And then we'll most likely do student team interviews the 2nd week of December. We'll have a live announcement event for those selected for the culminating event. Might not necessarily be Facebook Live, but we'll definitely do a live event, and we're targeting December 18th. So this entire challenge takes place in 1 semester, and then we'll obviously have our culminating event, whether it's on-site at a NASA Field Center or a virtual student symposium sometime in February. Right now we're targeting February 16th through the 18th. So let's take a look at the culminating event just real quickly. Like I mentioned, if we do have a culminating event on site, it will be at a NASA Field Center, and there's some pictures from last year's culminating event. We actually went down to the Ascent Abort 2 flight test, and our teams got to present to NASA leadership, actually see the flight test live, and then that 3rd picture there is actually running their data, running the flight test data from the launch that morning or the test that morning on their apps. So you are definitely part of the NASA community when you participate in the App Development Challenge. So we're definitely looking forward to registering your team and having you join us as part of the challenge. I'm going to go ahead and see if there are any questions that we want to go ahead and answer now as part of the App Development Challenge. All right, can one school have both a middle and upper school team with different lead teachers? Absolutely. And there's also the question that comes up about, do all students have to be from the same school? They do not have to be from the same school. And actually, a lead teacher can register more than 1 team. But you really want to think about that in regards to the culminating event. So make sure you review those eligibility requirements and think about what would happen if both of your teams were selected for the culminating event. So what responsibilities does the lead teacher have? Well, this is a student-led challenge. So we do get a lot of computer science teachers as lead teachers, but the app must be created by the students. So in the ADC guide, you'll find a lot of information on how we hope that teams will approach the challenge to help make it easier on the students, because this is a very rigorous time frame to complete development of an app. But for instance, we actually have teams reach out and contact a community mentor, someone that can actually, someone that can actually help the team in app development, suggest best practices. They would obviously not create anything or code anything for the team, but they can definitely help with providing guidance. So the lead teacher can act in that same way. However, they cannot create anything for the students. So the lead teacher would effectively be the person that communicates with the ADC team. If we have updates or changes, you would obviously communicate that to the students, and you would obviously assist with any of the logistics or organizing, scheduling or meetings, anything that would be helpful for the team, but not necessarily develop anything with the app. So it looks like we got a couple more questions coming in. I think we'll go ahead and answer those at the end. Our next presentation is from our ADC technical advisor, Dr. Brian Walsh. He's going to be talking a little bit more about the challenge and really talking about the data file and what SCAN hopes to see as you develop your apps. So some of his information will correspond with what I just presented on, and we'll try to answer all those questions at the end. But Brian, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for all the hard work these last few months. Without you, we obviously wouldn't have an app development challenge this year, and we're looking forward to seeing what we're able to contribute to SCAN. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. It's been a pleasure to contribute to this challenge, and really looking forward to seeing what the student teams can come up with, and looking forward to getting to understand their creativity and their ingenuity, and just looking forward to the products and working with the student teams throughout this activity. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to start off with a little bit of information about myself and my background. Patricia had mentioned, her background with NASA, and this is the corollary for me. I've actually been at the NASA Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio, since 2002. I was a co-op, which was it's another name for an intern, essentially, when I first started with NASA, I didn't actually get my bachelor's, my undergraduate degree, until 2003. So I was a co-op for my entire first year at NASA. From then on, I had received my Master's of Science in Electrical Engineering, and just this past May, I had completed my PhD in engineering. At the NASA Glenn Research Center, I serve as a senior communication systems engineer, and I'm also the technical lead for communication systems modeling and analysis. And I currently support 3 different projects with my efforts. First is the Human Landing System as part of the RF Communications Insight team. Second, I support Air Traffic Management Exploration Communications Modeling team. And finally, I'm also supporting the SCAN, the Space Communication and Navigation Quantum Communication Modeling team. And in my free time, I enjoy spending time with my wife and our 2 pugs, and just doing what we can do and trying to live in the current world environment that we have, as crazy as that is. Next slide. I'm going to start off next with a little bit of a background information on SCAN, Space Communication and Navigation. It's the program within NASA that operates the 3 different networks that provide communication and navigation services to the different missions, as well as in deep space and near Earth space, as well as for like the ISS, the International Space Station. And this diagram shown to you, there's color-coded blocks, red, green, and blue. We have the space network is shown in blue, that contains ground segment as well as satellites in space in an orbital position, so they essentially stay stationary over the Earth's surface. We have in red, we have the very large ground stations called the Deep Space Network, used to talk to missions very far from the Earth. And finally, in green, we have smaller ground stations located around the world that are part of the Near Earth Network. If you go to the next slide, first we'll talk a little bit more about the Deep Space Network. This is the system that contains ground stations at 3 different complexes, one in Goldstone, California, one in Madrid in Spain, and one in Canberra in Australia. They're roughly 120 degrees apart around the Earth, so the goal is to always have one of these complexes in view of the spacecraft that are very far away from the Earth. Missions that can use the DSN are ones that are around Mars, as well as the Voyager spacecraft in very, very deep space away from Earth. The Deep Space Network antennas are some of the largest on the planet. They contain antennas that are either 34 meters in diameter or 70 meters in diameter. And we in the US think of things in yards. Meters are very close in size to yards. So the smaller, the 34-meter antenna is roughly 1/3 the length of a football field in the diameter of the antenna. Just to kind of put that in perspective, how big those antennas are. Next slide, please. Here, a little bit about the near-Earth network. We show some images. On the bottom left is some antennas in Alaska. And on the upper right, you'll see a radome covering an antenna down in Antarctica. The near-Earth network is smaller antennas, ranging from 18 meters and as a maximum size down to 5 meters as a minimum size, and is used primarily to communicate with spacecraft that are in low Earth orbit or just slightly above. The larger antennas can be used to communicate for further missions as they approach the moon, but you're starting to get to limitations on it when you want to use very large data rates. And data rates mean you can push more information, just like your home network uses to receive internet communications and video and audio files. Next slide is a little bit about the space network. This is the network that runs the satellites in geostationary orbit, as well as the ground stations that communicate to those satellites in geostationary orbit. And this is the network that primarily is what is used by the International Space Station. It has signals that go from the ISS up to TDRS and then down to those ground stations and then back to mission control at the Johnson Space Center. Next slide. We'll talk a little bit now about what SCAN's expectations are for the app. We really have a goal and a desire for the student teams to develop a visualization representation of the lunar South Pole region. Now that can be a 2D or a 3D representation. And some of the images that Jamie had showed before were 2D, but 3D is a preferred approach. You can think of the 3D representation as what the astronaut would observe when they're walking or driving on the lunar South Pole region. That base visualization is to be created using the lunar data file. That data file is a CSV, separated variable data format. It is 4 columns representing the 4 pieces of information at each of the data points. Those location is the latitude, the longitude, the height, and the slope. Now, that data file contains all the data from -90 degrees latitude to -88 degrees latitude. So just a small portion of what's considered the lunar South Pole region, just enough to be useful for this challenge itself. And then with using that visualization, we would also like the student teams to develop a route between this landing site and a destination for the challenge. And we want that route to maintain a slope of less than 15 degrees, and to identify points along that route that could be used as link checkpoints to see, could we have a communication to the Earth? And for the high school student teams, we want to see if the Earth is in view. And so we provided a stationary point in the from the lunar perspective to see where the Earth is. And we want the student teams to check to see if the terrain that is between the astronaut and the Earth could be blocking that perspective. Next slide. So in this chart, we show 2 different aspects of the 2D of the terrain data files. The plot on the left is a color-coded 2D representation of the height on the lunar South Pole region. The color, with the more yellow tones, are larger, higher heights, and then the dark, deep blues are the lower heights. And this is for latitude and longitude. This perspective of the plot is actually centered on the South Pole region. So if you were to look at the very top center of the plot, that would be the direction going towards the lunar equator in the region that faces the Earth, essentially like your azimuth angle of 0, and the bottom center is what's going towards the far side of the moon. On the right-hand side, it's a perspective showing the same latitude and longitude points, but now we're color coding it based on the slope. Now the slope is important because astronauts, as they walk or drive on the lunar surface, need to do that safely. And we don't have the same kind of perspective like we do on Earth, where we have clean, solid roads that we can just walk or drive on. We're driving on regolith, and that's slippery. And we want to make sure the astronauts can do that safely. So we're doing that in regions that are relatively flat. And so the slope of we are showing for the route perspective is to look at less than 15 degrees. So trying to keep very flat regions here. And in this kind of plot, it's again color-coded with yellow being very steep slopes. And so the very center of the image there is the Shackleton crater, and you can see how steep the slope is, right near the lunar South Pole. Next slide, please. So this is another perspective of what the lunar South Pole could look like from an astronaut's perspective. Here, this is like a 3D representation. This is this aspect that's very well suited for game engines to create. And so you have the astronauts here, you have the Earth in the background, and you have some mountains in the distance, and you have some craters that are in the near region as well. All of that is represented, can be developed from the data file itself, because we're providing the height information and the slope information. But that height and slope is at those discrete points provided. And so the creativity for the students is, how do we take that data and render that in smooth images that can show that slope and the height differences. From the South Pole perspective as well, the Earth is kind of always near the horizon, and that's why the concern for terrain being in view exists, is because with the Earth being so low to the horizon, you need the terrain to not be blocking your perspective to Earth in order to have a direct communication link between the moon's South Pole region and the Earth. Next slide. So this is a little bit more about this slope-constrained route. Jamie had shown this plot before. Yellow is regions where we have slope that is less than 15 degrees, so you can consider that the good region for your route traversal, your path planning. And blue is the regions where the slope exceeds that 15 degrees. So we don't want the slope the path to go through any of the blue regions, because that would and could be considered unsafe to the astronauts. Now on the left-hand side, there's a red star that shows where the true lunar South Pole is. And so just to kind of show perspective for, within the lunar environment, where we're proposing for this route to take place at. And the upper right, there's another star that for this challenge, that is the landing site, the start of the route. And then on the center on the right, or bottom right, is the desired destination of the route. So the challenge activity is to design a path that goes from the upper right towards the bottom right stars that stays within that yellow region, so you've met that the slope constraint is always valid. And then for high school students, we're asking to design link checkpoints along that path, 10 link checkpoints that show that the Earth is in view and not blocked by terrain. Next slide. So with all this information on what the challenge is, it's important to know how this app can contribute to SCAN. And so within SCAN there's a program systems engineering, PSE, activities that's used to plan and predict communication link coverage and quality of the link. And we feel that we can use this to help visualize the lunar terrain relative to the astronauts' position on their routes. If you have terrain blocking your link, you can potentially have over-the-horizon communication, like your ham radio on the Earth, or you could experience multipath degradation of your signal if the terrain is nearby. Along that direct line of sight path. So by having that visualization, it provides SCAN an additional resource to understand why the link could perform the way it does at various potential landing sites and locations of traversals. And so we feel that future versions of the app, if they were to be expanded on, would be to make time dynamic positions of the Earth with its actual ground stations using and providing the communication services with respect to the Moon. For this challenge, we've made a simplified version and provided a fixed Earth position to use throughout. We can also look at using higher fidelity terrain models. In this challenge, all of the terrain data points are 40 meters apart from each other in horizontal components. But there are finer terrain data sets that are available and have been generated by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter spacecraft that has been orbiting the Moon for over a decade now. And finally, we could look to expand on the lunar terrain region. So it's not just limited to the -88 degrees latitude, but to the full region up to -84 degrees latitude to support the full scope of the Artemis missions within the lunar South Pole region. And if you have any questions about the challenge, please feel free to reach out at the email shown, jsc-m2mstem@mail.nasa.gov, as Jamie has said before. Thank you very much. Jamie, back to you.
All right, thanks, Brian. So we're going to have all three of us available now to answer some questions, and there are quite a few questions. So let's go ahead, and I think first question's for Patricia. For folks that have asked questions, if we don't get to those, we'll try to answer those if you go ahead and email us. But I think we'll only be able to get through some of the questions before we need to wrap things up for today. So I think this one, this one's for Patricia. We're going to go ahead and test habitats on the Moon in preparation for Mars.
So the first habitats that we take will be, well, really is your human landing system, because that's the first place you're going to live inside, right? The first place that you're going to stay. And then from there, we hope to create like a permanent habitat on the surface of the Moon. So yes, in a way, we are testing them. We'll test them on Earth first to make sure that they're safe, and then we'll go to the Moon and we'll live in them for longer periods of time to make sure that we've worked out all the kinks and that we know kind of what works and what doesn't. And then they will have to be modified for Mars. The Mars environment is not the exact same as the Moon, but it does require a pressurized system, and there is no oxygen. You're going to have to take all of your things with you. So there are a lot of things that are similar. So and the long answer to your question is yes, we are going to test on the Moon.
All right, next question. Brian, let's get your thoughts on this. So as part of the challenge, we let teams know they can use any operating system or programming language, but is there any particular better language that NASA already frequently uses that a team could use as part of the challenge?
I think that's very open, Jamie. We're not constraining the student teams. Different game engines can provide different types of capabilities, and we use software packages, on different operating systems all the time. That's just part of, doing our job daily. So there is no preferred approach from my perspective as the technical advisor.
Sounds good. So next question is, will the challenge webinars on October 14th and 28th be on YouTube or another platform? Will actually be on this platform on YouTube. If you go to the website and click on Get Started Here, you'll see the information for both of those events. All right, let's see what else we have here. Does a nonprofit organization, US-based, qualify to participate? If it's an education organization, absolutely. Go ahead and email us, and we'll go ahead and follow up with you specifically on that question and let you know if you're eligible to participate. All right, let's see what else we have. Once we make our final video, are we still allowed to make modifications to the app? You certainly can. Obviously, we'll be reviewing the videos for quite a few days, and then we'll let you know if your team has been selected for an interview. This question is for Patricia. Will the Artemis missions be held in cooperation with other countries or just the USA?
That's a great question. So yes, our first Artemis mission, Artemis 1, we have a collaboration and a partnership with the European Space Agency. ESA is the acronym for that agency, and they're actually building a part of the Orion spacecraft. They're building the service module, which it powers the spacecraft. It has the solar powers on that's the back end of the spacecraft with the solar powers. So our first mission, our test flight with Orion and SLS is a collaboration, and thus continuing on, ESA will be a part of Artemis for sure. And in that graphic I showed you of the gateway, NASA's in works to have partnerships with other agencies like Canada. We're working with JAXA, we're working with Russia, and there are other countries interested as well. But those are the ones I think that only have official partnerships with NASA at this time, but I know that there's talks with other countries as well. Great question.
All right. Is there a letter of support template we can use? There is no template. Effectively, what you'll be doing is just asking your administrator to support your participation in the challenge, and just to have that signed letter sent to us with an email of your intent to participate. That really just allows us to understand that you do have the support of your administration. If you are selected to the culminating event, to obviously travel and participate in those activities. So this has to be a short letter, nothing too long and detailed. Just says that we are aware of the challenge, they'll be participating in these activities, and that we support both our lead teacher and our students' efforts. What other questions do we have here? Okay, so there are a few questions about the scoring. And so the first thing I would do is direct you to the scoring rubrics to take a look at those. There are 9 categories, 4 of which are the app-based categories, and then 5 additional categories. Take a look at those and let us know if you still have additional questions, but a lot of questions about interface and ease of use, and specifically what the scoring will be. So we've set up the challenge in a way where we obviously are focusing on the visualizations and the path for exploration and communication link checkpoints, but we have additional items on there that have to do with how well your team is working together, how you've engaged others, specifically with community outreach, as well as working with a subject matter expert, and how you're communicating this information. And that actually aligns to a lot of the computer science K through 12 standards. So when you see all the information in the scoring rubric, it is very detailed, but it will definitely provide you a good guide to being successful. We've also added some extras, effectively bonus points. So we've given you, I think, 4 or 5 examples at the bottom of the scoring rubric. If you add those in there, you can get those extra points. But honestly, if you do something outside the requirements of the challenge that we find beneficial, and specifically Brian and the SCAN team would like to utilize, then you can definitely get additional points for that. So take a look at that. There's a lot of unique things in the rubric when it comes to scoring on the app, and then adding additional items for the team to consider. Okay, so we are about, actually we're just 2 minutes from wrapping things up. We do have a lot more questions coming in. I'll go ahead and send these to Patricia. Actually, well, since we're actually online, if you want these questions answered, you're gonna have to go ahead and email us at jsc-moon-to-mars-stem, m2mstem@mail.nasa.gov, and we'll try to provide answers for you as best we can. At this point in time, we're going to go ahead and talk about a few more things and wrap up our presentation today. But if you're joining us for the first time, we want you to go ahead and consider registering. And if you've already registered, we want you to go ahead and download the coding components and the ADC guide, and we will. And you want to get started on developing your app. If we could go to the next slide. There we go. Our next live virtual connection is going to be Wednesday, October 14th from 3 to 4 p.m. We're going to be talking about taking that lunar data file and creating visualizations, and then also about game engine use, specifically Unity and Unreal. We want you to join us for that. Even if you haven't registered, that might be an opportunity to learn more and actually form a team after that. We also want you to go ahead and watch NASA STEM Stars. That is a web chat series for students to engage with NASA subject matter experts. And we specifically want you to go ahead and watch the virtual reality training episode, which took place in May of 2020. So that actually has 2 JSC subject matter experts that are actually part of the ADC team. So they're going to be joining us on the next 2 live virtual connections. So it'd be great to learn a little bit more about them before we actually get a chance to talk with them. And they're going to definitely provide some resources for you to utilize in creating your app. So before we wrap things up today, I do want to take a moment to talk a little bit about NASA's Next Gen STEM. On the Moon to Mars activity is actually under Next Gen STEM. If you type in NASA Next Gen STEM in your browser, you'll see a whole bunch of opportunities and resources available to students and educators. There are other student challenges, educator guides, webinars, a lot of different opportunities that you can participate in as both a student and a teacher. So we encourage you to check that out. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. I do want to take a moment to thank Danae, Patricia, and Brian for your comments and presentations today. It was definitely helpful for our student teams. If you have any questions, once again, there's our email address. We definitely want you to go to the website and find out the more information that we posted today, including the guide and coding components. But with that, I'll go ahead and say thank you for attending today. We're looking forward to seeing your team participate in this year's challenge. Good luck, teams, and goodbye.
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Good luck.